Hi everyone. We're recording a virtual Viking session for you. So beside me you have the author David Macphail. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello. Yes, hello. Yeah, I am wearing the traditional Macphail Viking helmet with our own family crest on it. It's the distressed chicken, as you can. It's clearly in distress. Although I am not in distress. If I was in distress as a Viking, my horns would be down. There you go. That's me.
I like it. So my name is Barbara Henderson and I'm the author of The Chessman Thief, which is a historical novel for sort of upper primary, and it's based on some real events and some real artifacts, the famous Lewis Chessman. So together, we thought we would present you a whole range of Viking facts, and we'll be sort of counting along 10 cool Viking facts throughout the session, while also telling you a tiny little bit about our stories. So without any further ado, David, have you got your first fact?
My first fact, yes. Um, my first fact is about money, the Vikings. Although I'm really talking about the proper Dark Age Vikings, the ones that first showed up in the 8th century and the 9th century, and banks, obviously. So they used stuff like hack silver. Some of the warriors had arm rings, big silver arm rings that they used to carry around. They carried their wealth literally on them, on their sleeves. And but sometimes they used to hack up bits of silver, and they used to pay with bits of silver. In fact, a lot of people used to do that back then. So that's my first fact.
Right. So my first fact is, and this is going to be a bit of a disappointment given the fact that you've got your outfit with you. I have my drinking horn here,
Yeah.
but guys, believe it or not, real Viking helmets actually didn't have any horns at all.
No. Oh.
They just didn't. So that was something that a clever illustrator or a clever artist came up with at some point. So that's my first Viking fact. But before we move on to more Viking facts, how about we introduce our books a little bit? So, David, do you want to tell us about your new book? By the way, I have a copy right here, and it
Oh,
is
great.
great.
Yeah. And I've got my own copy. This is the first copy that came out. Velda, the Awesomest Viking and the Voyage of Deadly Doom. And basically, I write this book series called Thorfinn, the Nicest Viking. He's behind me here. And I've been writing this for years. So I've got about 8 books in the Thorfinn series. And I've gone around the country talking about being nice and polite and how great it is for the last couple of years. But I quite quickly came to the realization, especially with all that's going on in the world today and stuff like that actually it's not quite enough. You need to have a voice. And that's where Thorfinn's best pal, Velda, comes in. She's in the Thorfinn book. I decided it was time for her to go out into the world on her own and do an awful lot of shouting. And that's my book.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's really funny, guys. Very humorous story and absolutely fantastic to absorb yourself in. It's really suitable for kind of what age group would you say roughly, David, for that book?
Well, from primary to up.
Right.
I wouldn't like to put an upper age limit on it. I might get to secondary school and I might start going, okay, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be reading it when you get to secondary school, but
Well, I
really,
love it. So, and I'm a bit older than that. So
yeah.
I'll tell you a wee bit about my book. So I'm the author of The Chessman Thief. It's kind of late Viking age now, and we're talking probably, 9 plus upper primary, and it's based on these cool wee figures. This is a replica, obviously, because I'm not made of money. Um,
Yeah.
the Lewis chessmen, so some Viking chess pieces that were found in the Western Isles. And actually, they came with, I think, from Norway or from Iceland. And so it's a story about a Viking slave called Kylan who was taken in a raid from the Hebrides and is absolutely desperate to return and find his mother, find his homeland, and be a free man again. And when he is part of the workshop force that creates these super valuable chess pieces carved out of walrus ivory, that is when he spots his chance to return to the islands of his birth. So these are our books. And I wonder, David, just as we get started, do you think you could give us a wee flavour of Bella?
Oh, yeah,
Good
yeah,
little
no
reading?
problem. It's nice of you to let me go first. That's very nice of you, Barbara. I'll just read a short bit from the very beginning.
Go for it, yeah.
It was the Dark Ages, when kings and queens went stumbling around their pitch black, shouting, "Help! Where am I? Who turned out the lights?" The Vikings spread terror across the seas thanks to their fearsome dragon ships and their even more fearsome belching. The most feared of all the Viking dragon ships was the Valkyrie, a sleek, sturdy vessel with a sail of red and white stripes. The Valkyrie was crewed only by women. Belching was so terrifying it could frighten mermen half to death. The captain was a tall, blonde-haired woman called Freya. She was the noisiest and stinkiest belcher of them all. Like most captains, she liked to gaze out to sea a lot with her hands on her hips, giving loud, hearty laughs, as you would if you were living a life of adventure and scaring people. One day, as the Valkyrie was sailing the great northern sea, Freya turned to her helmswoman, Brunhilde of Barfhelm, and said, "Set sail for the island of certain death." "Hurrah!" cried her crew. "Hurrah!" echoed the youngest and newest crew member, Velda of Indgar. The tiny girl with thick red out from under a too-big helmet pumped her fist with glee. Yes! Certain death, finally! Velda rummaged around in her pack before festooning herself with leafy camouflage for sneaking purposes, coils of rope and a grappling hook for climbing somewhere you probably weren't meant to be purposes, and last but not least, weapons for terrifying people until they cried purposes. She leapt in front of Freya, whirling a gigantic axe around her head. "I am so ready for certain death, boss." Freya gave another of her hearty laughs. "You don't have to worry, Velda." Velda sliced the air with her axe. "Hey, are you kidding? This is exactly why I joined your crew. This is my chance to be a real Viking." "You are a real Viking," said Freya. "That's why I took you aboard." "Yeah, but girls were never allowed to do any of the fun Viking-y stuff back home in Indgar. It was always, 'Don't yell so much, Velda. Practice your weaving, Velda. Stop trying to kill what you don't like, Velda.' Then they tried to confiscate my axe. Well, that was the last straw." And it really was, for Velda had chopped the wheel of the village hay wagon in a fit of anger, sending Indgar's entire winter supply tumbling into the fjord. Velda didn't run from anyone, but she just happened to decide on a life at sea at the exact moment when she'd been chased by angry villagers with torches and pitchforks. Freya sat Velda down on a bench, placing a hand over her shoulder. "You know, some things aren't always..." "What does that mean?" "You'll see," smiled Freya. "We're not your average Viking crew here on the Valkyrie." And they really weren't. Their legendary feats were spoken of far and wide. How they battled the Kraken of Corryvreckan, taken on the trolls of Tromsø, and even stolen into the great hall of the dwarf lords and nipped their famous golden underpants. Velda reckoned the island of certain death would be a picnic for this crew, and she was itching to prove she was Viking enough to be one of them. Chapter 1. There you go.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to contrast that a bit. It's a totally different reading from The Chessman Thief. And actually, it's quite near the end, even though it used to be the prologue. So it was the very first paragraph I wrote of this book. And it sort of sets the atmosphere a little bit. As you can see, you know, David is brilliant at being hilarious. So this is a little bit more down the atmospheric route. Let's see what you think of this. At long last, daylight arrives. Seen from the shore, our boat must look like a fleck of brown dirt, spoiling the glossy surface of the sea. Approaching the headland, the rocks and the waves toss it like a thrush tosses a snail. I crouch in the middle, tipping my own weight this way and that to keep the vessel balanced. My right arm is stretched towards the rudder, such as it is, in the face of the power of these waves. But I believe in a greater power still, and my left arm curls tighter around the bag, so tight, in fact, that my knuckles show white against my ruddy skin. If I can reach land, I will do as I must. I will save my soul, even if it means losing my life in the saving. The rocks are near, so near, and I squint against the salt spray, forcing myself to breathe. Above me, the clouds churn solid enough to swallow up earth and sea and me with it. Can there be a more remote, God-forsaken place than this? No? Good. That gives you a wee flavour of the chessman thief. So nice wee short reading just to give you a flavour, but I think it might be time for another Viking act. So have you got another one for us, David?
Yeah, I've got another one. Yeah,
Go for it.
Well, Vikings had a reputation as being, pillagers and burners and looters and all this stuff. But actually, as I'm constantly explaining to people, they were really good traders and they were really good explorers and they were really good at building ships. I've never been to Oslo, unfortunately, but it's one of my ambitions. Maybe after the pandemic and we can travel places to go to Oslo and see some of the Viking ships in the museum there. The pictures, they really are things of beauty, the way that they're built. That's mine.
Fantastic. Yeah. Trading Vikings. So mine one is a little bit kind of weirder than that, to be honest. I tend to be drawn to the really weird stuff. Vikings used to be quite vain and they looked after their hair really brilliantly. But the creepiest, weirdest thing is that they used to file little grooves into their teeth to decorate them. And that was one of the ways that they would make themselves handsome and attractive, which just really tickled me. I didn't actually put it into the book because I thought it was a bit gross. But it's just an interesting thing to know, wouldn't you think?
They were into dental torture then.
They really were a little bit. So, hey, David, let's take a moment then to talk about, let's hold it the right way up, your fantastic book, Elda. Can you tell us a little bit about the character of Elva? Who's going to take to that character and who did you base it on? Is there anybody in particular?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. Originally, she's Thorfinn's friend from this book series. And when I started out writing the book, the Thorfinn book series, it was about this nice, polite kid. And I decided to put this character in. And she was a girl. She was more Viking than most of the Vikings, right? So she's very small and she has a gigantic huge helmet. And that's really how it started off. And it was based on my niece, Jessica, who was at that time, she was probably about 6. She's a lot older now. She's changed quite considerably. Now a teenager, but at that point, she was into stuff like kickboxing and she was quite fierce. She had an older brother that she used to go around defending whenever he got into trouble with bullies. So it was kind of based on her. And that's where Velda came from. The point where we've written about 8 of the Thorfinn books, when I suddenly suggested to my publisher, well, why don't we do a spin-off? Because being nice is quite good. Being nice is great and it's very important, but sometimes you really do have to have a voice. And there's another aspect there I think we could pick up on. And that's really where the spin-off came from.
Brilliant. Velda certainly, sticks up for herself and has got, I loved your little quirky, funny details. And I'm a little borderline, a wee bit jealous of just this ability to make me laugh as the reader, because that's not a superpower particularly that I think I have. I love that. How do you go about sort of, taking something as, brutal and sort of full on as the Viking world and kind of make it funny? Have you got a wee technique or top tip for any youngsters who are writing their own bits of Viking stories?
Oh yeah, well, over the top is the way to go, So Vikings, let's face it, they were a bit, and you wouldn't like to meet one on a dark night, or even in broad daylight on a beach. If the Vikings slightly over the top, then I think they lose some of their, horrifying appeal. But the thing is, well, you're obviously writing a book which is historical, and it's kind of different. It's really is kind of different. Well, the thing that drives these books, with the Thorfinn, is the fact that you've got these fierce Vikings on one side, and you've got Thorfinn who's polite, and they're always smashing into each other, and the sparks fly, and that's where the story comes from. But with Velda, she's actually fiercer than most of the Vikings. So that's just kind of different dynamic, and it's all about her bringing people together and bringing things out of people that people didn't really know about. So her new crewmates and things like that.
Mm.
So there you go. Good question.
I loved imagining Velda's voice, you know, and actually how you read it was pretty close to how I imagined it, which was lovely.
All right, that's good.
Yeah, just final question then. Have you got, you know, a memory maybe of something that really connected you as a boy, possibly, to Viking stories? Did you like these kind of stories? Did you like history when you were younger?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm obsessed with Vikings. I really am, and that's why I'm enjoying the Chessmen Thief so much. I haven't finished it yet, I have to say, but I'm really obsessed with Vikings. Some of the schools I go to, they know me as the Viking guy, and I write history books about Vikings as well, like this one,
Oh,
Vikings.
wow.
So I do a lot of Vikings, and when I was growing up, I lived on the west coast near a place called Largs. So me and my friends were constantly reenacting the Battle of Largs, and I think that's maybe where it came from. You know, other than that, I'm not sure, because I sure as heck would not like to be in the position of a thrall living in, you know, under Viking rule in Norway, you know, where your book is set at the outset. So it would be really quite terrifying. Even though
Yeah, but before you ask me any questions about my book, how about we just throw in another Viking fact just to string these guys along? So I think it's your turn to go first. I'm liking this dynamic, by the way.
All right. Well, just following on from my last point about Vikings being great traders, and the Vikings, everyone thinks about the Viking country as coming over from Scandinavia and invading here, but not many people know that they went the other way, especially the Swedish Vikings. They went over to, and they actually founded Russia. That's where Russia came from, and the word Russia actually comes from all these Swedish Vikings who came over and opened up all the trading networks right down to Constantinople. So there you go. That's an interesting.
Amazing. And my next fact is actually to say that Vikings were also farmers, and most people don't realize that. So these Viking raiders, they'd be really clever about it. So they would kind of, you know, sow all their crops in the springtime, and they'd go raiding for a bit, and they would bring all the harvest in, and then they'd go raiding for a bit. So there was like a raiding season, a sowing season, a raiding season, and a harvesting season. And that's how most Vikings worked. And actually, even the really powerful Vikings would judge each other by how big their farms were. So maybe that's another reason why we've got the, oh, I don't know what I've done with my drinking horn, why the drinking horns were so prevalent in those times. So that's my wee fact there.
Oh, good.
I really liked finding out about that.
Yes. So, right, about the Chessmen Thief. It's a really good fair about, where did you come up with the idea for the book?
So I had wanted to write a Viking story for some time. I grew up in Germany, and there was a Viking boy and his adventures on telly called Vicky the Viking. You might have had him too. So
I remember that.
See, and it had a really catchy theme tune, and I was pretty mesmerized by this. And so, I mean, I'd always been interested. And funnily, you said you'd like to visit Oslo. Well, in my 20s, I went to Oslo, first kind of holiday I did with my husband. And, you know, it was absolutely wonderful to go and see all these amazing Viking ships and Viking relics in the museums there. And that reinforced my interest. But I think I can date it to the moment I saw one of these cool Lewis chessmen in the museum in London, the British Museum. I made a point of seeking them out in the National Museum of Scotland and on the Isle of Skye as well. And I thought, my goodness, you know, these chess figures, nobody knows how they came to be in Scotland. And it sort of sparked this idea of maybe speculating and coming up with an origin story for these. But of course, I didn't want to just write about the figures. It needed to be an adventure. You know, you can't go wrong with a good sword fight. You can't go wrong with a chase. You can't go wrong with treasure, you know, secrets and betrayal and a really nasty villain. So all of that found its way into the story, and I absolutely loved writing it. But if there was anything that I loved even more was to visit Orkney and Lewis, the places where in my story the chessmen and my boys stop off. So that was what sparked the idea. Good question.
Yeah, it's kind of a unique standpoint for me, because a lot of the Viking stories, I mean, when I think of the Vikings, often stories that I read and stuff like that, they're set much further back when the Vikings were pagans. So, but in this book, it's interesting because you've got archbishops, you've got Christians, there's the things like that running through it. So, tell us about this world that that your hero lives.
So we're kind of in the later stages of the Norse world, and they still governed much of Scotland at the time. The North, you know, Shetland, Orkney, Caithness, and the Hebrides, all the way down to the Isle of Man, bits of Ireland. So actually, you know, even though we're now technically in the Middle Ages, there's still a huge kind of Norse force there. And what I found really interesting in 1156 is the role that these bishops played. So again, I'll bring this up to the camera. For the first time on record, a chess set included a bishop. You know, these bishops were made probably to impress somebody called, you know, a churchman of some sort or some kind of nobleman. And the idea of having churchmen on the board, you know, advising the king, that kind of thing was quite a good little angle to put in a newly Christian world. Of course, the Crusades were going on at that time as well. So you had raiding and crusades going on all alongside, and the same people were doing these things. So yeah, it was a completely unusual standpoint, but it's kind of the end, I suppose, of, you know, the Viking world as we know it. And I found it really fascinating because there are bits in there that, you know, even though the world today isn't utterly dominated by the church in the way that it was then, but we can tap into that. We kind of know what that is. These structures are a little bit familiar. And yeah, I found that that moment in the Viking world where you're sort of straddling both, like all the old stories are still there, do you know, and actually a lot of these old pagan practices are still there, but you've also got this whole new world sort of imposing itself. And I really like writing about that. The only reason it's said then is because that's when these are dated, second half of the 12th century, very end of the Norse kingdom that governed what then became to be known as Scotland. Yeah. Good questions.
Yeah, I've got another question actually, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
That came to mind just when you were reading your prologue, and I just thought it's a very evocative piece of writing. I was wondering why it's not your prologue, why you chose to put it further back in the book. Was it just for purposes, or?
It's at the very end of the book now, and I actually repeated this at the beginning and at the end so that hopefully a reader would sort of twig again and going, oh yeah, I remember now. But no, in the end, it was an editing decision that was made with my publishers where they felt it would possibly get in the way of the action. Like the very beginning of the Chessman Thief is a sort of action-packed confrontation, and they felt it would be really good to just begin with that and let people figure it out for themselves, and that's what we did. But yeah, I mean, I still like that little extra because I think while being very short, it gives a bit of a flavor of the book, I suppose. So yeah, but hey, David, I think it might be time for yet another fact. Are you ready?
Yes. Yeah. Will I go first? I'll go first with this
Yeah,
one.
definitely.
The Vikings gave us quite a lot of days of the week. For example, Tuesday is named after a Norse god. Wednesday is named after who? Who could it be? Odin. And Thursday is named after
How odd, yeah.
one of the Avengers. We don't have an Iron Man day. And Friday as well, named after Frigga. So like most of our days of the week are named after Norse gods.
Amazing. God, who knew, guys? And so my little fact is actually that if you're a very important Viking, then you would be buried with a ship or burnt with a ship. So actually, I mean, these ships were, I mean, you can't even believe how expensive those ships would have been in their money. Do you know what I mean? If you owned a ship, that was quite a big deal. And your status symbol would be to be buried or to be burned with that ship. So just to finish off in that case, our virtual Viking session, how about David, do you want to just give us a final little flavour of the book? A tiny little bit of Elda?
Well, what I could do is I could read you a very, very tiny bit of this book here, which is
Oh,
Thorfinn.
that's even better.
Thorfinn comes to Scotland, and it's just a very, very tiny bit at the beginning when he turns up in Scotland. And it's also the Dark Age. It was the Dark Age in Scotland when men were big and hairy, and women were also big and hairy. And everyone was scared of the Vikings. Where the highlands met the lowlands, the mountains and forests gave way to rolling farms and lots of towns. Rich towns, just the kind of towns Vikings loved to plunder. One day, a young Viking boy strolled out of the deep dark woods, a speckled pigeon perched on his shoulder. He walked up to the gates of the nearest town. The guards on the walls bristled with weapons. "Who goes there?" they growled. A wail spread across the boy's face. He took off his helmet and saluted them. "Good day, my dear sirs. How pleased I am to meet you. My name is Thorfinn, the very, very nice indeed. And this," he stroked the bird's head, "is my pigeon Percy. We're calling today on behalf of the Vikings." That's the very first bit from the Rotten Scots, where he comes to Scotland.
It's actually ages since I've heard that, and it's so lovely to hear it read by you. So my opening bit in the Testament Thief is sort of straight into the action in the workshop where they carve ivory, walrus ivory, for decorations, for churches, and for adornments, and so on. So we have a Viking slave talking about what happened. The broken tusk. I stagger under the weight of the tusks, more than half my height, long, heavy, dense, and slippery all at the same time. In there! Master Gunnar waves his arms impatiently, the saw already in his hand. I shouldn't have attempted to carry two. Entering the workshop, the tip of one catches the wooden doorframe of the other, which gets tangled in the leather hide which hangs in front to keep the worst of the wind out, and I am done for. If I was to slow time down, it happens like this. The first walrus tusk slides from my grasp. The bent tip slashes across my chin and forces my face sideways. It startles me enough to drop the other tusk, which bounces off my chest, crashing onto my legs before clattering to the stone floor. The sound! It's the sound that's worst of all. It's a splinter and a crack and a crunch, and I'm already ducking. Too late. Master Gunnar roars his anger and casts aside his saw. His huge, pockmarked fist flies towards my face. And that's the opening of the Chessman Thief. So time for just one final fact. I reckon, David, before our little virtual Viking session will come to an end. So will I go first?
You go first this time. Go on.
Excellent. So I wanted to say that Vikings, unbeknown to most people, actually loved board games, particularly strategy games. So they loved this game called Hnefatafl, which is similar to chess. And they absolutely adored chess when it came along, but it was relatively new at the time that I am writing, I'm setting the Chessman Thief. So I just find that fascinating, you know, the Vikings as craftsmen, the Vikings as game strategists, people who really enjoy a good story, the sort of cultured side of the Vikings. I was quite tickled by that. So that's my final fact. The Vikings loved games.
Oh, very good. Well, my final fact is that originally no one actually called them Vikings. They might have done by the Chessmen Thief is set, I feel, but initially, at least when the Vikings first pitched up in England, they called them Danes because the ones who invaded England were all over from Denmark, whereas the ones we got in places like Lewis and Norse, so maybe they call them Northmen. But I think the name Viking came along much later. And maybe along with the helmet thing, it was popularized sort of closer to our period in time, and that's maybe where it came from. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I find that really interesting. So, guys, if you want to invite David to visit your school to talk about his very cool Viking books, you can find him all over the internet. Where can they find you?
Yes. Oh, where can they find you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I do have a YouTube page, and I've got a website and things like that. You could probably find me there.
Brilliant. Yes. So same for me, I've got a YouTube channel and I have got a website called barbarahenderson.co.uk. So you can find out any information there. But yeah, what fun it's been to record some virtual Viking stuff. And yeah, I really hope you guys enjoy your Vikings when you're studying them at school. So we want to finish with a little Viking writing prompt, weren't we, David? So yeah, so I'll go first maybe. So I'm thinking if you wanted to write a really nice atmospheric bit of Viking writing, why not pick the moment when a young Viking, a girl or a boy, is on the ship sailing out from the village that's all they've ever known into the unknown ocean. You know, what are they feeling? What are they thinking? What are they hearing and smelling? You know, what kind of stuff is going on around them? Give me a handful of little details. But the best thing is, don't say how they're feeling. Show me. So if they're nervous, then don't say, she was nervous. Say, she bit her teeth and draped her blanket tighter around her face. Something like that shows me that somebody's not very sure of themselves. So that's my writing challenge. What about you, David?
That's a good tip. Well, I get a lot of inspiration from Norse legends, especially when I'm writing stories about Velda, and I'm writing a new one just now that will be out next year. One of my favorite legends, Norse legends, is the one where Thor was the bride in order to get his hammer back and go and visit the giants because there's a wedding. So he gets all dressed up with, you know, as a bride, with the full regalia, a total Thor as a bride, and amazingly, he passes for a bride when he goes there. And the giants don't go, wait a minute, you don't look remotely like a. But I think this is a great story. So the tip I have, or the challenge I have for you, is to write a story where someone has to put on a disguise that they really don't like. So what happens? Put another character in it, a secondary character, and maybe what kind of lessons would the character learn by the end of it?
That sounds amazing. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for our virtual Viking tour. And we can't wait to hear what you guys think. So get in touch on Twitter or on Facebook, your teachers. Send us your questions and tell us what you think of the virtual Vikings. And from us, we can just say goodbye, right?
See you later, guys.